She was 78, her memory fading like ink left out in the rain. On Willow Street, in the snowy Vermont town of Maple Hollow, the neighbors called her Evelyn Brooks, a gentle woman who once taught children their first words, now struggling to remember her own.
I understand the numbers
they
are
often
bad,
saw her silhouette
but we need to
behind
find
the
a
curtain,
solution,
waiting for
and
someone
fast.
who no longer
This
came
is
home.
critical.
Her son was always away, chasing deadlines and phone calls.
I told you.
Her daughter-in-law
I am not
smiled
discussing
in public,
this further.
but behind closed doors, that smile turned to ice. One winter night, when the storm howled like a living thing, Evelyn wandered into the snow barefoot, whispering to the wind, "John said he'd take me home, but maybe he's busy tonight." Hours later, a German shepherd named Rex caught her scent beneath the freezing moon, dragging his young partner, Officer Daniel Reed, toward a truth that would shatter the silence of Willow Street. What they found in that narrow alley wasn't just an old woman lost. It was the moment humanity found itself again. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. Let's see how far this story of courage and redemption can travel tonight. Snow fell in soft, soundless sheets over the town of Maple Hollow, a place so small that the post office still smelled of pine and old letters. It was the kind of Vermont town where people left their doors unlocked and waved to strangers from pickup trucks, where the sound of the church bell marked not just time, but the pulse of an entire community. Yet on Willow Street, in a weathered two-story house trimmed with faded green shutters, the air was different, heavier, quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Inside sat Evelyn Brooks, 78 years old, her silver hair gathered loosely at the nape of her neck, her eyes the pale blue of thawing ice. Once, she had been the heart of Maple Hollow Elementary, the teacher who read stories by candlelight during snowstorms when the power went out, who believed every child carried a spark of God in them. But now, her hands trembled when she reached for a teacup, and sometimes she forgot where the kettle was. Dementia had come softly, like frost spreading across a window, slow, beautiful, and merciless. Every morning, Evelyn took her seat by the window overlooking the street. From there she watched the world drift by, children trudging to school, the milk truck rattling down the hill, the snow piling up on the fence her husband had built 40 years ago. She still spoke to him sometimes, her voice gentle, almost shy. "John, do you see the way the snow sits on the roof? It looks like the frosting you used to spread on my birthday cake." The silence never answered, but in her heart she heard him anyway. Michael Brooks, her only son, had inherited his father's square shoulders and quiet drive. A civil engineer by trade, he built bridges for a living, yet somehow failed to build the one that mattered most. The bridge back to home. His company kept him traveling across states, chasing contracts and deadlines, convinced that providing was the same as loving. He called every few days, always with the same soft apology. "Mom, I'll be home soon. Laura's taking good care of you." He believed it, because believing it was easier than facing the truth. Laura Brooks, his wife of 7 years, was 38, tall and graceful, with dark hair that fell perfectly around her shoulders and eyes the color of polished steel. To strangers, she seemed the picture of patience, a woman who brought casseroles to church gatherings, who smiled politely when spoken to. But at home, when the front door closed and the lights dimmed, that smile cooled into something else. Her world ran on control and perfection, and Evelyn's forgetfulness was like a stain she couldn't scrub away. The first time Laura lost her temper, it had been over something small, a glass of milk spilled across the table. Evelyn had looked up, startled, the liquid seeping toward her lap like a spreading shadow. "I'm sorry, dear. My hand just—" "Your hand always just," Laura snapped, her voice sharp as cracked ice. Then she caught herself, forced a tight smile, and wiped the table clean. "Let's just be more careful next time." From that night on, something changed. The kindness became a mask worn only when Michael was home. When he left for work trips, the mask came off. The refrigerator key disappeared from its hook. Evelyn's favorite mug went missing. Meals grew smaller, colder. Laura's footsteps upstairs became a sound Evelyn learned to fear, measured, impatient, always coming closer. Outside, the snow deepened. The house at 214 Willow Street seemed to shrink into itself, a lonely figure wrapped in frost. Only one person noticed, the neighbor next door, Clara Jenkins, 65, with a round face and hands that smelled of cinnamon. She had been Evelyn's friend since church choir days. Clara baked pies every Sunday, saying the smell of butter and spice could heal a soul faster than any sermon. Sometimes she crossed the yard, knocking softly at Evelyn's door with a pie in hand. "Apple again," she'd say, forcing a cheerful tone. "Just like your husband used to love." Evelyn would smile faintly, her eyes flickering with confusion before softening. "John always said your crust was better than mine." But lately, Clara had begun to notice things that didn't fit. Faint bruises on Evelyn's wrists, the way her sleeves were always tugged down, the tremor in her voice when she said, "Laura's just been tired, dear. She works so hard." Clara wanted to ask more, but fear, an old, heavy fear of meddling, held her tongue. She told herself she was imagining things. That night, she prayed twice before bed, asking God for courage she didn't yet have. On the far side of town, Officer Daniel Reed steered his patrol car through the falling snow. At 29, he was young, but seasoned enough to know that most of Maple Hollow's calls involved stray deer or noise complaints, not crimes. The radio crackled softly, filling the silence. In the passenger seat sat Rex, his German Shepherd partner, 4 years old, black and tan coat dusted with snowflakes, amber eyes alert to every movement. Rex had been rescued from a neglect case 2 years earlier, when he was found chained behind an abandoned barn, ribs visible, yet still wagging his tail at the officer who approached. Daniel had been that officer. Since then, they'd become inseparable, a pair bound by quiet understanding. When Daniel spoke, Rex listened. When Rex barked, Daniel trusted. They passed Willow Street often on winter patrols. Daniel had noticed the old house at the corner, the one with the flickering light upstairs that never seemed to go out. Once Rex had paused, nose to the air, as if catching a scent from far away. "What is it, boy?" Daniel had asked, leaning forward to look. But there had been nothing, only the drifting snow and the yellow glow of a window. He shrugged, gave the leash a gentle tug, and moved on. That night, Evelyn sat by that very window, wrapped in a knitted shawl. The room smelled faintly of soap and pine polish. On the table beside her sat a framed photograph, John in his army uniform, smiling the way young men do when they believe life will always wait for them. Evelyn touched the glass, tracing his face with a trembling finger. "Do you remember, John?" she whispered. "You said we'd grow old here. You promised." Behind her, the door creaked. Laura's voice sliced through the quiet. "Who are you talking to now?" Evelyn flinched. "Just the photo." Laura crossed the room, her perfume sharp and cold. "You know, it's not healthy to keep living in the past. You confuse everyone when you do that." She adjusted the frame roughly, setting it straight, though it hadn't been crooked. "Michael's got enough stress at work. He doesn't need to worry about you, too." Evelyn nodded, murmuring something that sounded like agreement. When Laura left, she turned the picture slightly again, tilting it just off-center the way John used to like it. It was her small rebellion, invisible but hers. Outside, the storm gathered strength. The wind brushed against the windows like restless hands. In the neighboring yard, Clara closed her curtains, whispering another prayer before blowing out the lamp. On patrol, Officer Reed slowed his car, glancing once more toward the glowing window of the Brooks house. The dog beside him gave a low, thoughtful rumble. "Yeah," Daniel said softly. "Something about that place feels off." Inside, Evelyn leaned back in her chair, eyelids drooping. The kettle whistled faintly in the kitchen, forgotten. Somewhere upstairs, Laura's footsteps echoed once, then faded. For a brief moment, Evelyn felt a warmth she couldn't name, a sense that John was near, that the snow outside wasn't loneliness, but a veil between worlds. She closed her eyes and smiled. "Good night, love," she whispered. The old clock ticked on. Outside, the light in the window stayed burning, casting a dim, steady glow over the silent street. It was the only light that never went out on Willow Street. Morning came slowly to Willow Street. The sunlight filtered through a thin veil of frost that clung to every window pane. Inside the Brooks house, warmth had no home. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast and disinfectant, an odd mix that spoke of both control and neglect. Laura Brooks stood by the counter, her posture flawless as always, back straight, chin high, one manicured hand resting lightly on a mug of black coffee. Her dark hair was tied into a perfect bun, not a strand out of place. She was dressed not for comfort, but for presentation. A pressed cream blouse tucked into tailored gray slacks, a pearl pendant at her throat. She looked every bit the competent professional, the perfect suburban wife. Only her eyes betrayed her, sharp, gray, restless, like glass that might crack under pressure. Across the kitchen table sat Evelyn, wrapped in her cardigan, trying to spread jam on a piece of toast. Her hands trembled. The knife slipped and left a small smear on the tablecloth. Laura's gaze darted to it immediately. "Careful," she said evenly, too calmly, as if speaking to a child. "You don't want to ruin the cloth again." Evelyn froze, murmured a quiet apology, and dabbed at the stain with a napkin. Laura watched for a moment longer, then turned away with the faintest roll of her eyes. Michael's voice came from the hall. "Morning, everyone." He appeared in his suit and overcoat, adjusting his tie, his briefcase already in hand. His hair was slightly unkempt, his face marked by sleeplessness and the rush of another workday. He bent down and kissed his wife's cheek. "You look beautiful." Laura smiled, soft and convincing, and brushed an imaginary lint from his lapel. "Good luck on the project." When Michael kissed his mother's head, Evelyn smiled weakly. "Drive safe, dear." Her voice trembled, but he didn't notice. He was already thinking about deadlines, schedules, blueprints. The front door closed. The silence that followed was sudden, heavy, and familiar. Laura exhaled slowly, as if shedding her second skin. The warmth in her face vanished. "Do you know," she said, turning toward Evelyn, "how exhausting it is to keep this house clean when you keep forgetting simple things? You left the back door open last night. Do you want someone to rob us?" Evelyn blinked, her eyes uncertain. I thought I closed it." "Of course you thought you did." Laura's tone cut like glass. "You always think, but thoughts don't make you useful." She took Evelyn's half-eaten toast and dropped it into the trash. The sound of it hitting the bin was louder than it should have been. Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to say something kind, to calm the storm, but words tangled in her fading memory. So she just nodded, eyes fixed on her lap. Laura turned away, checking the spotless countertop, as if looking for imperfections that justified her anger. Control had always been her armor. Born in a small Ohio town, to a mother who cleaned offices at night and a father who left before she turned 10, Laura had learned early that perfection was the only thing people respected. Messy people got abandoned. Forgetful people got ignored. When Michael's charm and stability entered her life, she promised herself she'd never lose control again, never let the chaos of others seep into her order. But Evelyn, with her trembling hands and misplaced memories, represented everything Laura had spent her life escaping. That afternoon, the snow thickened. Evelyn retreated to her room upstairs, the one overlooking Willow Street. It was a small space lined with old photographs and the faint smell of lavender. She sat on her bed, clutching a faded picture of her husband in uniform, the corners curling from age. In it, John Brooks smiled broadly, his arm around a young Evelyn with sunlight in her hair. She touched his face, whispering, "John, do you think I'm forgetting you?" Downstairs, Laura vacuumed the hall, the hum loud and monotonous, a sound meant to drown out thought. She paused only once, to check Evelyn's pillbox. 2 capsules were missing, instead of 1. "You can't even take medicine properly," she muttered under her breath. She set the box down harder than necessary, the plastic snap echoing through the quiet. Later, as evening fell, the house grew still again. The snow outside glowed faintly under the streetlights. Evelyn moved softly from room to room, tracing her fingers along the wallpaper as though feeling her way through memory. When she reached the living room, she paused by the piano that hadn't been played in years. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the polished wood. She lifted the lid and touched the keys. A note sounded, fragile, trembling, like a breath caught between worlds. From the kitchen doorway, Laura appeared. "Don't touch that," she said. Evelyn's hands froze above the keys. "I just wanted to—" "It's not yours anymore. You can't even remember the songs." Laura's tone was calm, but her eyes burned. She turned away before Evelyn could see the tear that almost, but not quite, fell. Across the street, Clara Jenkins looked out from her own window. She had been setting out birdseed for the cardinals that visited her porch when she noticed Evelyn's figure at the piano. Clara hesitated, pressing a hand to her chest. She had seen that same fragile posture in her own mother years ago, right before the end. Clara was a widow, 65, short and soft around the edges, her hair the color of powdered snow. She had lived alone since her husband, Harold, passed away 3 winters before. Her days revolved around the church, her garden, and her cat, Mittens, a gray tabby with mismatched eyes. She debated crossing the street, but she had been warned by Michael once, gently, not to worry too much about his mother. She sighed, instead lighting a candle on her windowsill. "Lord," she whispered, "watch over her tonight." At the edge of town, Officer Daniel Reed sat in his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. The heater hummed softly. Rex, in the passenger seat, lifted his head, ears twitching. The dog's breath fogged the window as he watched the flakes drift down. Daniel smiled faintly. "You never get tired of the snow, do you, buddy?" Rex let out a quiet chuff, tail thumping once. His coat gleamed even in the dim light, muscles taut beneath his fur. Daniel reached out, scratching behind the dog's ear. "You know, I think you like this town more than I do." Daniel had grown up one state over, in New Hampshire, a childhood marked by silence and empty chairs. His father, a logger, had died when Daniel was 12. His mother never recovered. It was the town's old sheriff who gave him direction, who told him that helping people was a way to keep the darkness away. So Daniel joined the force young, restless, carrying too much empathy for his own good. Tonight, that empathy stirred again. He slowed the patrol car as he passed Willow Street. Something about the house at the corner caught his attention. The same flickering upstairs light that never seemed to go out. He frowned. "It's late for someone to be awake," he murmured. Rex's ears perked, and he let out a low sound, half growl, half curiosity. Daniel parked at the curb, stepping out into the snow. The cold bit through his gloves as he looked around. The neighborhood was silent, blanketed in white. Then Rex pulled slightly on the leash, nose to the ground. "What is it?" Daniel followed as the dog moved toward the fence line. There, half buried in the snow, lay a piece of knitted fabric, faded blue, frayed at the edges, with 2 initials stitched in white thread. E.B. Daniel crouched, brushing off the frost. "E.B.," he read quietly. He looked back toward the house. "Evelyn Brooks," he murmured. He didn't know her personally, only by name, one of the old families that had lived here since before the highway came through. He turned the scarf in his hands, noticing how carefully it had been mended, how old it looked. A wave of unease swept through him. He tucked it into his pocket. Back in the patrol car, he made a note in his logbook. "Unclaimed scarf, E.B., found near 214 Willow Street." Rex stared out the window, head resting on his paws, eyes thoughtful. "I know, boy," Daniel said softly. "It's probably nothing, but it feels wrong, doesn't it?" As he drove away, the house receded in the rearview mirror, its single window still glowing faintly. Inside, Evelyn lay in bed, whispering to herself the names she feared forgetting. John, Michael, Clara. Her voice faded like the snow melting on the sill. Laura, downstairs, scrolled through her phone, the television playing softly in the background. She paused only once, to lock the refrigerator door, just in case. Outside, the scarf-shaped void in the snow slowly filled again, erasing the trace of what had been lost. The storm came without warning, sweeping down from the Green Mountains like a living thing. By evening, the sky had turned the color of pewter, and the first flakes fell with a strange silence, thick, slow, deliberate. On Willow Street, the Brooks house sat at the edge of the town, like a lonely lantern waiting to be snuffed out. Inside, the air carried no warmth. The furnace hummed weakly, the fire in the hearth long gone cold. Evelyn Brooks sat by the unlit fireplace, her woolen shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, her breath visible in the fading light. In her trembling hands she held a framed photograph, John Brooks in his uniform, smiling as though time itself had paused for him. Evelyn brushed her thumb over his face and whispered, "John, do you see the snow? You used to say it looked like heaven falling." Her voice faltered, soft as the snow outside. "Are you cold, my love?" Upstairs, Laura Brooks stood in front of the mirror, brushing her dark hair with long, controlled strokes. Her reflection stared back at her, poised, flawless, unfeeling. The day had been long. The bank where she worked had denied her request for a promotion again, citing communication issues. They never said what they meant, but Laura knew. They thought she was too rigid, too polished, too cold. She'd smiled anyway, the same tight smile she'd practiced since childhood, when her mother used to slap her for crying. Never let them see you weak. That voice still lived inside her, guiding every breath. Downstairs, Evelyn placed the picture frame back on the mantel. She turned her head slightly as if listening. Somewhere above, she thought she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. The boards creaked. The wind moaned. She whispered again, "John?" The old house answered only with a sigh. The kettle began to whistle faintly in the kitchen. Evelyn rose carefully, her knees protesting. Her slippers slid a little on the wooden floor as she made her way toward the sound. When she reached the stove, she turned off the gas, her mind a fog of half-formed memories. She poured the hot water into her cup, but misjudged her strength. The mug slipped from her grasp, crashing to the floor, shards scattering like stars. She froze, breathless. The footsteps upstairs stopped. Then came Laura's voice, sharp, slicing through the stillness. What now? Within moments, Laura appeared at the top of the stairs, her silhouette lit by the dim hall light. She descended quickly, her bare feet slapping against the wood. "For God's sake, can't you go one day without breaking something?" Her voice cracked, more from exhaustion than rage, but it carried the same edge as always. Evelyn stammered, "I was just making tea. I thought you might want some." Laura stared at her, jaw tight. "I don't want anything from you," she said quietly. She stepped forward, swept the broken pieces into a pan, and dumped them in the trash. The kettle hissed softly, steam curling like ghosts between them. Laura's eyes flicked toward her mother-in-law, old, frail, eyes shining with tears she didn't dare let fall. For a fleeting second, something human flickered across Laura's face, pity or perhaps recognition. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Just go to bed," she muttered, "before you hurt yourself." Evelyn nodded and shuffled toward the stairs. Halfway up, she turned back. "Laura," she said softly, "you remind me of myself when I was your age." Laura paused mid-step, startled. "What?" "I used to think being strong meant not crying." Evelyn's lips trembled into a faint smile. "But it only meant I forgot how to love." Laura's mouth opened slightly as though to respond, but no words came. She turned sharply and went back upstairs, her heart beating too fast. Later, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, staring out the window. The storm had grown furious. The snow came sideways now, tapping against the glass like desperate fingers. She thought she heard a voice in the wind, a low, familiar whisper calling her name. "Evelyn!" It sounded like John. She blinked, and for a moment, she saw him beyond the window, standing by the old maple tree, smiling the way he had the day he came home from the war. "John," she whispered, pressing her hand to the cold glass. "Is it really you?" The house groaned under the weight of the wind. Evelyn rose, pulling her shawl tighter, and made her way down the stairs. The lights flickered, then steadied. She reached the front door. The lock had never been fixed properly since the last storm. It caught sometimes didn't. Tonight, it turned easily. She opened the door. Outside, the world was white. The snow swirled around her, luminous under the streetlights. "John," she called again, voice trembling. There was no answer, only the wind. She stepped onto the porch, her slippers sinking into the drift. Her breath formed small clouds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. In her confusion, the memory of years folded together, John laughing in the summer garden, Michael as a boy chasing his red kite, Laura smiling at the wedding, Clara's cinnamon pies cooling on the windowsill. They all felt so close, so real. "I'm coming, love," she whispered. She stepped off the porch and into the storm. At that same hour, across town, Officer Daniel Reed and Rex were finishing their patrol. The radio had gone quiet. The streets were empty. The snow made every sound feel distant. Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, head turning toward the window, ears twitching. Daniel glanced at him. "What is it?" The dog let out a soft whine. "You hear something?" Daniel slowed the car as they approached Willow Street. The snow was thicker here. the road half buried. He rolled down his window, the cold biting at his skin. Then he heard it, a faint metallic rattle like a gate in the wind. Rex gave a low growl, pulling slightly on the leash. Okay, let's check it out. He parked by the curb and stepped out, flashlight cutting through the swirling white. The beam caught the shape of a small wooden fence half collapsed under the snow. Rex moved ahead, nose to the ground, tail stiff. Daniel followed, boots crunching. That's when he saw them, footprints, small and uneven, leading away from the Brooks house and down toward the older part of town. Daniel crouched. "They're fresh," he murmured. He touched his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reed. I have possible missing elderly female heading east past Willow Street, requesting confirmation." The response came through static. "Copy, Officer Reed. Any ID?" "Not yet, but I've got tracks. We're moving." Rex barked once, eager. Daniel gave him a nod. "Lead the way, buddy." The wind howled as they followed the tracks, weaving between the fences and abandoned sheds that lined the back alleys. The footprints wavered, as if the person had stumbled. Daniel's flashlight bobbed in rhythm with his steps. "Come on, stay with me," he muttered. Rex darted forward, nose to the snow, then stopped suddenly at the mouth of a narrow alley. He barked twice, short, urgent. Daniel turned the light ahead and saw nothing but white. Then he noticed something half buried in the snow, a handkerchief, embroidered with tiny blue flowers. He picked it up, brushing off the ice. "This must be hers," he whispered. He pocketed it carefully. Meanwhile, back at the Brooks house, Laura was pacing upstairs. She had tried reading, but the words refused to stay still on the page. Something gnawed at her, a sound, faint but persistent. She realized after a while that it was silence. She hadn't heard Evelyn's soft muttering in over an hour. She checked the clock. Nearly midnight. Frowning, she went to the landing and called, "Evelyn?" No answer. Her irritation grew. "Evelyn, it's late." Still nothing. She descended the stairs, annoyance curdling into unease. The house felt wrong, colder, emptier. The front door was ajar, snow swirling in. Her breath caught. She stepped closer, calling again, louder now. "Evelyn!" The wind answered with a hollow wail. She stood there for several seconds, frozen, then slammed the door shut. Her hands shook. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." For a long moment she did nothing, then grabbed her phone and dialed her husband's number. "Michael," she said when he answered groggily. "Your mother, she's gone." Outside, the storm swallowed the street whole. Daniel and Rex moved slowly now, the snow nearly up to their knees. "Evelyn!" Daniel called into the wind. His voice was carried away instantly. The flashlight beam flickered. Rex barked again, pulling toward the left, down another narrow alley where the wind died suddenly. The air here felt still, heavy. "All right, boy," Daniel whispered. "Let's find her." The storm had settled into a deep, relentless rhythm, a chorus of wind and white that drowned out the world. The streets of Maple Hollow lay buried beneath a thick, unbroken quilt of snow. Streetlights flickered like faint halos, their glow trembling in the freezing air. It was well past midnight when Officer Daniel Reed turned into the narrow alley behind Willow Street, his flashlight beam slicing through the swirling flakes. The wind howled between the walls of two abandoned brick buildings, echoing like voices calling from long ago. "Rex, heel," Daniel murmured, but the German shepherd had already caught the scent. His ears were high, nose low, body tense with purpose. Snow clung to his fur, outlining his powerful frame. His breath came out in soft clouds as he led Daniel forward, paws pressing deep into the drift. And then, a sound. Faint, fragile, like someone weeping into the wind. Daniel lifted his light. At first, he thought it was a pile of discarded fabric, a bundle of blankets left behind by someone seeking shelter. But then, it moved. He rushed forward, boots crunching against the ice. The light fell upon the figure of an old woman curled against the wall, her thin shoulders trembling. Her gray hair, tangled and heavy with frost, framed a face pale as porcelain. "Ma'am!" Daniel's voice cracked through the storm. He dropped to his knees. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Evelyn stirred, her lips trembling. Her voice came out broken and breathless. John said he'd take me home." Her eyes, clouded by dementia and cold, searched the shadows as if looking for a ghost. But maybe he's busy tonight. Daniel's throat tightened. He unzipped his coat and wrapped it gently around her shoulders. The warmth of his body filled the air between them, fragile but real. "You're safe now," he said softly. "We're going to get you home." Beside him, Rex pressed closer, his fur brushing against the old woman's knees. The dog's golden brown eyes held an almost human depth, steady, patient, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. He licked Evelyn's hand once, then rested his head on her lap, keeping her anchored to the present. The gesture broke something inside Daniel, a mix of sorrow and reverence. He whispered, "Good boy." Evelyn blinked slowly, her voice trembling as she lifted her head toward Daniel. "Are you my son?" The question hit him like a sudden wind. Daniel hesitated, heart thudding. He wanted to correct her, to tell her no. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in years. Unguarded trust. The kind of faith that believed love could still find its way back. He swallowed hard and simply said, "I'm here, ma'am. I'm here now." Evelyn smiled faintly through her tears. Her frail fingers clutched his wrist, seeking warmth. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. Her eyelids fluttered, exhaustion overtaking her, and, before she could say more, she slumped forward. "Hey, stay with me," Daniel said urgently, checking her pulse. It was faint, but there. He pulled his radio to his mouth. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reed. I've located the missing subject. Female, elderly, around 78. She's unresponsive, possible hypothermia. Requesting immediate medical assistance on Willowback Alley, east of Maple." The radio hissed with static before the reply came. "Copy that, Reed. Ambulance en route. ETA 6 minutes." 6 minutes in this cold could feel like a lifetime. Daniel shrugged off his own scarf, wrapping it around Evelyn's neck. He held her close, murmuring softly. Nonsense words, the kind people say to frightened children. "You're going to be okay, ma'am. Just hold on." The storm screamed louder, as if to test that promise. Across the street, Clara Jenkins was awake. She had been kneeling by her window for an hour, rosary in hand, lips whispering prayers that fogged the glass. When the sound of sirens echoed faintly through the snow, she gasped, clutching the beads tighter. "Lord," she whispered, "please don't let her die out there. Not like this. Not forgotten." Her cat, Mittens, stirred at her feet, meowing softly. Clara rose, slipping her shawl around her shoulders, and stepped onto her porch. The snow reached her calves, biting through her slippers. She could barely see across the street, but the flash of red and blue lights blurred through the veil of snow, painting the night like stained glass. She pressed the rosary to her lips. "She's not alone anymore," she murmured. Back in the alley, Daniel's flashlight had dimmed, but the faint glow of an approaching ambulance flickered in the distance. The engine's hum mingled with the storm's fury. Evelyn stirred slightly in his arms, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at him, disoriented. "It's cold," she whispered. "I know," he said gently. "Help's coming." "John always said—" Her voice trailed off, lost in the wind. Then she managed a fragile smile. "The snow looks different when you're not alone." Daniel bit the inside of his cheek to keep his voice steady. "That's right," he said. "You're not alone anymore." The paramedics arrived, 2 figures in thick coats, faces hidden by scarves. The taller one, Nurse Fiona Clark, took the lead. Fiona was in her early 40s, sturdy and calm, with a voice that could soothe chaos. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her hair tucked under a wool cap. "What have we got?" she asked briskly, kneeling beside them. "Elderly female, hypothermia, mild frostbite. Found collapsed here about 10 minutes ago," Daniel replied. Fiona nodded, pulling a stethoscope from her coat pocket. She checked Evelyn's breathing and pulse, then looked up. "She's lucky. Another hour out here and she wouldn't have made it." They moved quickly, wrapping Evelyn in thermal blankets, attaching a small oxygen tube to her nose. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, her hand slipped from Daniel's coat. For a brief second, she stirred again, her lips forming silent words. He leaned closer to hear. "Tell John." "I waited," she murmured. Daniel's eyes burned. He nodded, though she was already fading back into unconsciousness. As the ambulance doors closed, the lights casting gold and blue across the snow, Daniel stood in the alley, coatless and trembling. Rex pressed against his leg, whining softly. Daniel crouched beside him, rubbing his fur. "We found her, buddy. That's what matters." Rex licked his chin, his tail sweeping weakly against the snow. Fiona leaned out from the ambulance door. "We'll take her to Maple Hollow Medical. You should come by later to file the report." "I will," Daniel said. "Thank you." The ambulance pulled away, leaving twin trails in the snow that filled almost instantly under the wind. For a moment, Daniel stood there, staring into the white void, feeling something shift inside him, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. He thought of his own mother, alone in her final days, her calls unanswered because he'd been too far, too late. Maybe, he thought, this was his chance to keep another son's promise. Rex gave a low bark, breaking his reverie. Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah, I hear you. Let's go home." As they walked back toward the patrol car, the snow softened, the storm beginning to tire. The street lamps glowed a little brighter, as if relieved. Behind the windows of the Brooks house, the lights were still on. Laura sat in the living room, knees pulled to her chest, tears glistening on her cheeks. The anger that had filled her all these years had dissolved into something she could barely name. Guilt, maybe, or fear. The phone lay in her lap, Michael's voice still echoing from the last call. They found her. She's alive. Laura whispered to the empty room. "Thank God." Outside, on Willow Street, Clara remained on her porch, snow settling on her shawl, rosary clasped between her fingers. "Thank you," she said again to the night, her breath turning to silver in the cold. And though no one else saw it, a faint beam of golden light from the last street lamp fell exactly where Evelyn had been found. A fragile promise kept by strangers, carried through the storm. The snow had quieted by morning. Maple Hollow awoke to a pale sky brushed with silver. The storm finally spent, leaving behind a town wrapped in stillness and frost. In the hospital on Birch Avenue, light seeped gently through the blinds of room 204. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and winter air, that strange combination of sterility and hope. Evelyn Brooks lay beneath white sheets, her skin almost blending with them. A soft hum came from the heart monitor beside her bed, steady and reassuring. Her breath rose and fell shallowly, lips faintly parted, eyelashes trembling as if she were dreaming of something distant yet tender. Her hands, frail, thin, veined like paper leaves, clutched the edge of a woolen blanket someone had placed over her, newly washed, smelling faintly of lavender. Outside her room, Officer Daniel Reed leaned against the wall, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He hadn't gone home yet. The fatigue showed in the red rims around his eyes and the stiffness in his shoulders. His uniform jacket hung open, and the scarf, Evelyn's scarf, initials EB embroidered near the corner, was neatly folded in his hands. At his feet sat Rex, alert but calm, his head resting between his paws, amber eyes half closed but always watching. Nurse Fiona Clark, the same woman who had pulled Evelyn from the snow, walked past carrying a clipboard. Her steps were brisk, but her face softened when she saw Daniel. "You stayed all night?" she asked. Daniel shrugged, smiling faintly. "Couldn't sleep." She tilted her head, studying him. "You did good work last night, officer. That woman would have frozen to death without you." He nodded, though his gaze drifted toward the closed hospital door. "I just wish—" He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Fiona gave him a knowing look. She had seen that expression before, the look of people who wanted to rewrite the past by saving someone in the present. Inside the room, Evelyn stirred. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, revealing a cloudy gray that held both confusion and faint wonder. For a moment, she looked around, not recognizing the place. The soft beeps, the white walls, the unfamiliar light. Then she saw the window. Snowflakes drifted outside like falling feathers, and her lips curved into the gentlest smile. A nurse adjusted her IV line. "Good morning, Mrs. Brooks," she said softly. "You're at Maple Hollow Medical. You were found last night during the storm. You're safe now." Evelyn nodded faintly, though her gaze lingered on the window. "Safe," she repeated, as if testing the word. Her voice was soft, cracked with age, but threaded with something steady. John used to say that too. Moments later, the door opened quietly. Michael Brooks stepped inside. He looked nothing like the man he had been a week ago, The once polished engineer who moved through airports and meetings with clockwork precision, now seemed hollowed out, his tie loose, his face unshaven, his eyes rimmed red from sleepless hours. He carried guilt in every motion, the way his shoulders hunched slightly, the way his fingers trembled when he reached for the doorframe. When he first heard the news, his mother lost in the storm, he'd left the project site without a word, driving all night through the snow. But nothing prepared him for what he saw when he arrived home that morning. Police lights flashing across his driveway, neighbors whispering, and an officer handing him a report that shattered what remained of his denial. The footage from the security cameras in the house, he had installed them months ago, for safety, at Laura's suggestion, played back in his living room like a nightmare on loop. There was no sound, only the cold, unfiltered images. His mother flinching beneath Laura's raised hand, Laura snatching a plate from her and letting it shatter, Laura locking the refrigerator door. And Evelyn, small and trembling, standing by the window, mouthing the words, "John, I'm sorry." Michael had fallen to his knees. It wasn't rage that broke him. It was the weight of his blindness. He had been so busy chasing success that he hadn't noticed cruelty living under his own roof. Now, standing at his mother's bedside, he struggled to find words. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracked like ice underfoot. Evelyn turned her head slowly, her eyes focused with effort, scanning his face. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize him, and that uncertainty cut him deeper than any accusation could. Then her lips parted in a small, trembling smile. "Michael," she whispered, "you came." He moved closer, kneeling beside her bed. "I should have come sooner." He took her hand, cold, light as air, and pressed it between his palms. "I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything. For not being there. For letting you—" His words dissolved into tears. Evelyn reached up with her trembling hand and brushed his hair back, the same gesture she'd done when he was a child. Her touch was weak but full of warmth. "Don't cry, my boy," she said softly. "I'm home now." He blinked, confused. "Home? We're still at the hospital." She smiled faintly, eyes glimmering with tears that caught the morning light. "Not that kind of home." Her voice wavered, but her tone was peaceful. "The kind you feel when someone remembers to hold your hand." Outside the room, Daniel watched through the small glass panel in the door. He saw Michael bow his head beside his mother's bed and felt something shift inside him. A quiet relief, mixed with the ache of his own memories. He turned to Fiona, who was updating Evelyn's chart. "She's got family after all," he said softly. Fiona nodded. "Everyone deserves someone who shows up in the end." Rex stirred, his ears pricking up as the door opened. Daniel stepped quietly and into the room. "Mrs. Brooks," he said gently, "it's good to see you awake." Evelyn's gaze lifted to meet his, faint recognition flickering there. "You," she murmured, "the young man in the snow." Daniel smiled. "That's right. You gave us quite the scare." He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded the scarf, now washed and neatly pressed. The initials EB gleamed faintly in the morning light. "I think this belongs to you." He laid it gently on her bedside table. Evelyn looked at it, then at Rex sitting by his feet, tail sweeping the floor. "He found me first," she whispered. "The dog. He was the first warmth I felt." Daniel chuckled softly. "That's Rex. He doesn't give up on people." Rex gave a quiet woof, as if understanding, and rested his chin on the side of Evelyn's bed. She reached down weakly, her hand brushing the top of his head. For a moment, time seemed to hold still. Three souls connected in quiet grace. A woman who had been forgotten, a man who had been searching for redemption, and a dog who simply followed his heart. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of gray pavement. In the distance, church bells rang faintly, slow, solemn, and somehow full of hope. That same morning, Laura Brooks sat in a small interrogation room at the Maple Hollow Police Department. Her face was pale, eyes swollen from hours of crying. The woman who once wore perfection like armor now sat stripped of it, her hair loose, her hands shaking as she signed the statement. Officer Fiona Clark, called in as a witness, watched quietly from the corner. Laura spoke only once, her voice brittle. "I never meant to hurt her. I just couldn't stand the silence anymore. When the papers were done, the officers led her away. As the door closed behind her, Fiona whispered a prayer she'd once heard her grandmother say, "May mercy find her, even when love could not." Back in room 204, Evelyn dozed lightly. The heart monitor beeped slow and steady. Michael sat beside her, holding her hand, his thumb tracing the blue veins that marked time's passage. Daniel stood at the window, watching the sunlight break through the clouds. He turned to leave, but Evelyn's voice stopped him. "Officer," she murmured, eyes half open. "Don't let the light go out." Daniel smiled gently. "I won't." As he stepped out, the afternoon light spilled across the room. On the bedside table, the scarf caught it, glowing faintly, almost golden. Rex lay by the bed, eyes half closed, keeping his quiet vigil. Outside, the snow reflected the hospital's warm light, like dozens of small mirrors returning the glow to heaven. And for the first time in years, the house on Willow Street would sleep in peace, its door, somewhere in memory, still left with the light on. And that was The Forgotten Mother, a story that reminds us no memory ever truly disappears. Sometimes hearts just forget how to love. Evelyn's journey through the storm was not just about finding her way home. It was about a son rediscovering what home truly means, and a stranger answering the quiet call of mercy. Because when people lose sight of one another, it is often compassion that speaks the loudest and leads us back to where we belong. If this story touched you, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and share your thoughts about what home means to you. Don't forget to like this video, follow, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, redemption, and the love that never fades. Thank you for watching, and may your own light always stay on.